There is a certain kind of person you have met in your life, maybe a boss, a rival, a friend who always seems to land on top. They lose a job and somehow they come back richer. They lose a lover and somehow they come back more desired. They lose an argument in the room and somehow they win the war outside of it. You watch them and you think, luck, timing, privilege. But I am here to tell you something that will unsettle you. It is none of these things. The people who always win are not smarter than you. They are not, in most cases, more talented than you. What separates them is that they have made peace with the truth the rest of us spend our lives running from. That human beings are not driven by reason but by emotion, insecurity, ego, and desire, and that the world rewards those who understand this machinery and refuse to look away from it. I have spent my life studying power. Not the power of armies or governments, but the quieter, more dangerous power that operates in boardrooms, bedrooms, and dinner tables. And what I have found is this: winning, real winning, the kind that repeats itself again and again across a lifetime, is not a matter of virtue. It is a matter of psychology, dark psychology. We are raised on a lie. It is a comforting lie told to us by well-meaning parents and teachers. And it goes something like this: work hard, be honest, treat people well, and the world will reward you. I do not say this to mock the sentiment. Kindness and honesty are values I hold dear. But if you study history, if you study the biographies of those who have accumulated real, lasting power, from the Medici to the modern boardroom, you will find a pattern that contradicts the fairy tale almost every time. The world does not reward fairness. The world rewards those who understand that most other people are still operating under the illusion of fairness and who quietly, calmly refuse to be bound by it themselves. This is the first and most uncomfortable truth about the people who always win. They let go of the belief that life is a fair contest very early on. Not because they are cruel by nature, but because they observed with a cold and clinical eye that the people who cling hardest to the idea of fairness are the ones who get devoured by those who do not share the same illusion. There is a kind of naivety in assuming your opponent is playing the same game you are. The winners I have studied, the strategists, the moguls, the seducers of history, never make this mistake twice. Consider the story of Talleyrand, the French diplomat who served under Napoleon, then betrayed him, then served the monarchy that replaced him, then betrayed that monarchy too. History books like to call him a traitor. But look closer, and you see a man who understood something almost nobody around him understood. Loyalty to a person is a liability. Loyalty to your own position is survival. While others were emotionally entangled in ideology, in revenge, in righteous fury, Talleyrand remained a step removed, watching the emotional currents of everyone around him and positioning himself accordingly. He did not win because he was the most powerful man in the room. He won because he was the only man in the room who was not being controlled by his own feelings. This is the pattern you will see again and again if you study the people who consistently win in life. They develop what I call emotional distance, not coldness, not sociopathy, but a disciplined ability to observe their own emotional reactions as data rather than as commands. Most people feel anger and act on anger in the same breath. Most people feel desire and act on desire in the same breath. The winners feel the emotion, note it, and then ask a colder question. What does this feeling want me to do? And is that actually in my interest? This single habit, the pause between feeling and action, is worth more than any strategy I could teach you, because it is the foundation upon which every other dark psychological skill is built. Now, here is where it gets uncomfortable, because this same emotional distance that protects the winners from being manipulated is the very same tool they use to manipulate everyone else. Once you stop being ruled by your own emotions, you begin to see with startling clarity how ruled by emotion everyone around you still is. You see the executive who makes decisions out of a need to be admired. You see the negotiator who folds the moment there is tension in the room because he cannot tolerate discomfort. You see the friend who tells you what you want to hear because she fears your disapproval more than she values honesty. To the person who has mastered emotional distance, other people become, in a sense, transparent. Their fears, their vanities, their insecurities are written plainly across their behavior, and the skilled operator learns to read this text fluently. This is not a comfortable thing to accept about human nature, and I do not ask you to celebrate it. I ask you only to see it, because refusing to see it is precisely what keeps most people vulnerable. The person who believes everyone is basically good and reasonable is not more virtuous than the person who studies power. They are simply less prepared. And unpreparedness, in the arena of ambition, is punished swiftly and without mercy. There is a second layer to this myth of fair play that deserves examination: the belief that competence alone is sufficient. I have watched brilliant, hard-working people lose again and again to less talented rivals, and the reason is almost always the same. They believe that if they simply did excellent work, recognition would follow naturally. They treated the game as a meritocracy when in truth, every human institution is a theater of perception, alliance, and narrative. The winners understand that being good at something and being perceived as good at something are two entirely different skills, and that the second skill, cultivated deliberately, will outperform raw talent nearly every time. This is why you so often see the confident, the persuasive, the socially fluent rise above the merely competent. It is not, as the cynics say, that the world is broken. It is that the world runs on perception, and the winners have simply stopped pretending otherwise. They study how they are seen the way a general studies terrain. They understand that a single well-timed act of visible generosity will do more for their reputation than a decade of quiet, unnoticed diligence. They understand that appearing calm under pressure matters more, in the eyes of others, than actually being calm, though the truly dangerous ones have learned to be both. What I am describing to you is not a moral failing unique to a few ruthless individuals. It is simply what happens when a person stops lying to themselves about how human beings actually operate. The tragedy is not that such people exist. The tragedy is that so few people ever learn to recognize the game being played around them until they have already lost several rounds of it. In the parts that follow, I will show you exactly how these people build their advantage through patience, through reading hidden motives, through the weaponization of emotion, through narrative control, and finally, through the construction of a kind of quiet invulnerability that makes them almost impossible to defeat. Prepare yourself. What you are about to learn cannot be unlearned. If emotional distance is the foundation, patience is the first weapon built upon it. And I do not mean patience in the passive sense, the patience of someone who simply waits for good things to happen. I mean something far more calculating. The patience of a predator who has already decided on the kill and is now simply waiting for the moment when the outcome is guaranteed rather than merely likely. Most people are addicted to speed. They want the promotion this quarter, the apology this hour, the victory in this very conversation. This addiction to immediate resolution is, without exception, one of the greatest vulnerabilities a human being can carry. And the people who always win have trained themselves out of it almost entirely. They understand a principle that runs through nearly every historical account of successful strategists, from Sun Tzu to the great political operators of the 20th century. The person who needs the outcome least holds the most power in any negotiation, any conflict, any relationship. Think about the times in your own life when you have felt desperate for a job offer, desperate for someone's approval, desperate to win an argument. Now recall how that desperation showed on your face, in your voice, and the speed of your replies. Other people can smell desperation the way animals smell fear, and the winners have learned to never, under any circumstance, let it show. More than that, they have learned to actually not feel it, because true patience cannot be faked convincingly for long. It must be cultivated as a genuine internal state, an almost meditative detachment from the outcome, even while working relentlessly toward it. I once studied the career of a man who spent nearly 8 years positioning himself for a single executive role. To outside observers, his progress looked almost accidental. A lucky transfer here, a friendly mentor there, a project that happened to land in the right hands. But when you examine the sequence closely, you see a mind that was playing a very long game while everyone around him played short ones. He took a demotion at one point. A demotion because it placed him closer to the person who would eventually decide who got the top job. His peers thought he had made a foolish career move. In reality, he had simply calculated that proximity to power, even at a lower rank, was worth more than status at a higher one. This is patience weaponized, the willingness to accept short-term loss for a long-term near-certain gain, while allowing everyone else to believe you have miscalculated. This brings me to a darker application of patience, one that I hesitate to describe, but that you must understand if you are to recognize it when it is used against you. Strategic patience is also the art of letting your enemies destroy themselves. The amateur, when wronged, strikes back immediately and in doing so reveals their hand, their methods, their weaknesses. The master waits. They understand that most conflicts, left alone, resolve themselves in favor of whoever has the most self-control, because the other party, driven by ego and impatience, will eventually overreach. They will say the cruel thing in front of the wrong person. They will make the reckless decision under pressure. They will burn a bridge they didn't need to burn. And when they do, the patient operator is standing quietly nearby, having done nothing but wait, ready to benefit from the wreckage. This is why you must be extraordinarily careful about who you allow to see your ambitions, your grievances, and your timelines. The patient operator collects this information from everyone around them, not to use it immediately, but to file it away, sometimes for years, until the moment it becomes useful. I want you to sit with that for a moment, because it should change the way you speak in rooms you assume are safe. Every complaint you voice about a colleague, every grudge you reveal, every insecurity you expose in a moment of trust, all of it is potential ammunition in the hands of someone patient enough to hold on to it. But patience is not merely a defensive art. It is also, and perhaps more importantly, a tool of relationship building that most people fundamentally misunderstand. The winners rarely try to extract value from a relationship the moment it forms. They invest first, sometimes for years, building trust, offering favors without immediate expectation of return, appearing generous and unhurried. This is not, in most cases, pure altruism. It is the deliberate construction of what I call social capital, a reserve of goodwill and obligation that can be drawn upon precisely when it is needed most. The amateur asks for the favor on day one and burns the relationship. The master waits until the relationship is strong enough that the favor is barely even perceived as a cost. There is a particular discipline required to sustain this kind of patience, and it is the discipline of tolerating discomfort without reacting to it. Silence in a negotiation, an unanswered message, an insult left unaddressed. These things create a kind of psychological pressure that most people cannot bear. They rush to fill the silence, to respond to the insult, to chase the unanswered message, and in doing so they surrender their position. The winners have trained themselves to sit inside that discomfort, sometimes for uncomfortably long stretches, because they understand a simple truth. Whoever breaks first loses leverage. I want to leave you with this thought as we move into the next part of our discussion. Patience, as I am describing it, is not passivity. It is the most aggressive form of restraint, a coiled spring, not a resting one. The winners are not calm because they lack ambition. They are calm because they have redirected all the energy of their ambition into observation, timing, and control, rather than into the immediate emotional release that ordinary people call taking action. Learn to wait the way they wait, and you will already be operating on a different level than almost everyone you compete against. Every person you meet is performing. This is not cynicism. It is simply an accurate description of social life. We soften our true opinions to maintain relationships. We exaggerate our confidence to be taken seriously. We hide our insecurities behind humor or aggression or excessive modesty. The people who always win understand that the version of a person presented to the world is rarely the version that is actually making decisions beneath the surface, and they have trained themselves to read past the performance to the motive underneath it. This skill begins with a simple but radical shift in attention. Instead of listening to what people say they want, the winners watch what people are actually protecting. Every human being underneath their stated goals is guarding something: their status, their sense of competence, their fear of irrelevance, their need to be seen as good, their fear of being exposed as a fraud. Find what a person is protecting, and you understand what will actually move them, far more reliably than anything they will admit to you directly. Consider the colleague who insists loudly and often that they don't care about titles or aren't political. In my experience, this is one of the most reliable signals that a person cares a great deal about status and is deeply uncomfortable with how political the environment actually is. The overcorrection is the tell. People rarely announce, unprompted, the opposite of what they secretly fear about themselves. The executive who constantly reminds the room of his humble beginnings is often the one most anxious about being perceived as out of touch. The friend who insists she's not the jealous type, right before describing, in detail, a situation that would make anyone jealous, is revealing more than she intends. Once you begin listening for these overcorrections, you will hear them everywhere, and you will never again be able to take a person's self-description at face value. The winners also pay extraordinarily close attention to what I call inconsistency under pressure. The gap between how someone behaves when things are going well and how they behave the moment something threatens them. Charm is cheap and universal. Almost everyone can be pleasant when nothing is at stake. The true character of a person, and therefore their real motives, is revealed only in moments of friction. When a plan is disrupted, when credit must be shared, when a mistake must be owned. I have seen people build entire careers by simply remembering how someone behaved in a single moment of crisis years earlier, long after everyone else had forgotten, and using that memory to accurately predict how the same person would behave under similar pressure in the future. There is another, more unsettling layer to this. The winners understand that people reveal their deepest motives not through their words, but through their envy. Watch closely who a person criticizes unprompted, who they bring up in conversation with a slight edge in their voice, whose success seems to visibly unsettle them even as they offer congratulations. Envy is one of the most difficult emotions to disguise completely because it operates at a level beneath conscious control. A person can lie about their ambitions with perfect composure, but their involuntary reaction to a rival's success, the flicker of tension in the jaw, the too quick change of subject, tells you almost everything about what they actually want and who they actually fear. This brings us to a technique I have observed among the most skilled operators throughout history. They deliberately create small moments of pressure, almost like tests, in order to observe a person's authentic reaction. A minor and seemingly accidental change of plans, an offhand comment designed to probe a sensitive area, a moment of manufactured scarcity, only one seat available, only one opportunity on the table to see who scrambles and who remains composed. To the untrained observer, these look like ordinary social moments. To the trained eye, they are diagnostic instruments, revealing exactly how a person handles disruption, competition, and disappointment long before any of it matters in a high-stakes situation. I want to be direct with you about the darker implication of this skill, because I believe you deserve the full picture rather than a comfortable half-truth. Once a person becomes fluent in reading hidden motives, they gain the ability to speak to what someone actually wants rather than what they claim to want. And this is an extraordinarily persuasive and extraordinarily dangerous capability. The salesman who understands that a client's real motive is not better efficiency, but fear of being replaced by a younger rival, will close the deal by speaking to the fear, not the stated goal. The political operator who understands that a colleague's real motive is not serving the public, but being remembered as significant, will offer legacy, not policy, and win their support instantly. This is manipulation in its purest form, and I will not pretend otherwise. But I will also tell you this: you cannot defend yourself against a manipulation you do not understand. And the only people who remain permanently vulnerable to this technique are the ones who refuse to believe it exists. The final piece of this skill is perhaps the most important: reading your own hidden motives with the same unflinching honesty you apply to others. Most people fail here entirely. They can spot vanity in a colleague from across the room, but remain blind to the exact same vanity operating within their own decisions. The winners submit themselves to the same cold analysis. They ask relentlessly, what am I actually protecting with this decision? Is it truly the outcome I claim to want, or is it my ego, my fear of embarrassment, my need for approval? This internal honesty is uncomfortable, and most people avoid it precisely because it is uncomfortable. But it is this very discomfort, faced repeatedly, that separates the amateur from the master. You cannot read the hidden motives of others with any real precision until you have stopped lying to yourself about your own. Here we arrive at the darkest and most consequential chapter of what I have to teach you. If patience is the foundation and motive reading is the diagnostic tool, then the weaponization of emotion is the mechanism through which the winners actually exert influence over the people and situations around them. I want to warn you plainly before we continue. What follows will feel at moments like a betrayal of the innocent picture you may hold of human relationships. I ask only that you keep reading, because understanding this mechanism is the single most effective form of protection against it. Every emotion, once identified in another person, becomes a lever. Fear can be amplified to create urgency and compliance. Guilt can be gently activated to secure a favor that would otherwise be refused. Flattery, delivered with precision rather than excess, can dissolve a person's natural skepticism entirely. The amateur believes that persuasion happens through logic, through better arguments, stronger evidence, more compelling data. The winner knows that persuasion happens almost entirely through emotional state, and that logic is deployed afterward merely to give the already emotionally decided person a story they can tell themselves about why they made a rational choice. Consider how skilled negotiators create artificial time pressure, a deadline that is often more flexible than presented, a competing offer that may or may not fully exist. Not because the pressure is strictly true, but because urgency short-circuits careful reasoning and pushes a person toward instinctive, fear-driven decisions. This is not a modern invention. It is a technique as old as the marketplace itself, refined endlessly by every generation of merchants, diplomats, and seducers. The winners understand that a calm, unhurried counterpart is their greatest obstacle. And so their first move, almost instinctively, is to disturb that calm. Flattery deserves special attention here, because it is so often dismissed as crude or obvious, when in fact its most dangerous form is neither. Crude flattery, telling someone directly how brilliant or beautiful or powerful they are, is easily detected and often distrusted, particularly by intelligent people who have learned to be suspicious of excessive praise. The sophisticated operator flatters indirectly, by asking for advice rather than giving compliments, by remembering small details that suggest genuine attention, by appearing slightly odd in a manner too subtle to be called out as insincere. This indirect flattery bypasses the target's natural defenses entirely, because it does not feel like flattery. It feels like being truly seen. And the desire to be truly seen is, in nearly every human being, more powerful than the desire to be told you are impressive. Guilt operates through a similarly quiet mechanism. The winners rarely demand what they want directly. Demands invite resistance and negotiation. Instead, they create a situation in which giving them what they want feels, to the other person, like the only decent and honorable thing to do. A carefully mentioned sacrifice. A reminder delivered without apparent malice of a past favor. a slight visible disappointment that is never explicitly voiced but is impossible to miss. These techniques work because most people have been raised with a deep discomfort around appearing selfish or ungrateful, and the skilled operator knows exactly how to position themselves so that refusal carries a social cost the other person is unwilling to pay. Perhaps the most unsettling technique in this category is what I call emotional destabilization followed by rescue. This is a pattern you will recognize instantly once I describe it, because you have almost certainly experienced it, and possibly without ever naming it. A person, a manager, a partner, a mentor creates a period of tension, criticism, or coldness, leaving the target anxious and uncertain of their standing. Then, at precisely the right moment, that same person offers warmth, approval, or reassurance. The relief the target feels in that moment of rescue is disproportionate to the actual gesture because it is measured not against neutral ground, but against the anxiety that preceded it. This cycle, repeated even a few times, creates a powerful and often unconscious loyalty. The target begins to crave the approval of the very person who manufactured their distress in the first place. This is among the oldest and most effective techniques of control in human history, used in courts, in corporations, and in intimate relationships alike, and I describe it to you not to teach you to use it, but so that you will recognize the pattern the moment it begins happening to you. I want to pause here and speak plainly. Everything I have described in this section can be used to build genuine connection and trust, or it can be used to manipulate and exploit. The techniques themselves are morally neutral. It is the intention behind them and the honesty with which they are deployed that determines whether they build something real or something predatory. The winners I have studied throughout history have not always cared about this distinction, and that is precisely why understanding their methods matters so much. You are not being taught this so that you may exploit others without conscience. You are being taught this because the world is already full of people who will use these exact techniques on you, deliberately without hesitation, and your only real defense is recognition. The single most important habit you can develop after learning all of this is a simple pause before any decision made under strong emotion, before you say yes out of guilt, before you commit out of fear, before you trust out of flattery. Ask yourself in that pause a single question: who benefits if I feel this way right now? If the honest answer points towards someone other than yourself, you have likely just witnessed the machinery I have described in this section operating on you in real time. That single moment of awareness, cultivated as a habit, is worth more than any counter-manipulation I could teach you, because it restores to you the one thing every skilled operator depends on you not having: a clear head in the moment that matters most. Facts do not win wars of perception, stories do. This is perhaps the most consistent lesson I have drawn from decades of studying power, and it is the one that most consistently separates those who win once from those who win repeatedly across an entire lifetime. The winners understand, often intuitively, that reality is negotiable in the minds of others, and that whoever controls the story being told about an event controls, in almost every meaningful sense, the event itself. Consider two people involved in the same failed project. One spends their energy defending the accuracy of what happened, insisting on the correct sequence of events, the precise allocation of blame, the technically fair distribution of responsibility. The other spends their energy crafting the narrative that will be remembered, positioning themselves as the person who raised the early warning that was ignored, who fought valiantly against circumstances beyond their control, who learned the crucial lesson that will prevent future failure. 6 months later, almost no one in the organization remembers the precise fact. What they remember is the story, and the storyteller, not the fact defender, is the one who survives with their reputation intact and often remarkably enhanced. This is not dishonesty in the crude sense of fabricating events that did not occur. The most skilled narrative controllers rarely need to lie outright because lies are fragile and can be disproven. Instead, they practice a subtler art, selective emphasis. Every complex event contains multiple true narratives buried within it, and the skilled operator simply selects, amplifies, and repeats the true narrative that serves them, while allowing the equally true but less convenient narratives to fade quietly from memory. This is far more durable than lying, because every individual claim can withstand scrutiny. It is only the overall shape of the story, the emphasis and the framing, that has been engineered. I want to draw your attention to a technique that appears repeatedly throughout the biographies of history's great political operators: the preemptive narrative. Rather than waiting to explain themselves after a setback, the skilled operator anticipates the setback and plants the explanatory story in advance, so that when the difficult moment arrives, observers already have a framework through which to interpret it favorably. A leader who suspects a project may fail will, months in advance, begin quietly mentioning the unusual difficulty of the circumstances, the unprecedented obstacles, the resistance from external forces beyond their control. By the time failure actually occurs, the audience has already been prepared to view it not as incompetence, but as an unfortunate and almost inevitable outcome given the conditions described. This is narrative control at its most sophisticated, shaping the interpretation of an event before the event has even happened. There is also a defensive dimension to narrative control that deserves attention, because most people only think of this skill offensively. The winners understand that silence is rarely neutral. An unanswered accusation, left alone, tends to calcify into accepted fact over time, regardless of its truth. This is why skilled operators respond to reputational threats swiftly, though rarely with visible anger or defensiveness, which only lends the accusation credibility. Instead, they respond with calm reframing, redirecting attention toward a more favorable interpretation, and when necessary, allowing time and new events to bury the old story beneath fresher ones. The public memory and the organizational memory is remarkably short and remarkably malleable. The skilled narrative controller understands this and uses it patiently to their advantage. Perhaps the most powerful narrative technique of all is the one the winners apply to themselves, privately, before they ever apply it to an audience: the deliberate construction of a personal myth. This is not vanity in the shallow sense. It is the recognition that human beings, including the winners themselves, act more consistently and more confidently when guided by a clear internal story about who they are and what they are destined to accomplish. The executive who has decided deep within themselves that they are the person who turns struggling divisions around will walk into every difficult situation with a confidence that is not arrogance but identity. This self-narrative becomes self-fulfilling, not through magic, but through the simple mechanism of consistent behavior. A person who believes themselves to be resilient will act resiliently under pressure, and that behavior, observed repeatedly by others, becomes the external reputation that reinforces the internal myth even further. I will leave you with a warning about this particular skill, because it is the one most easily abused at scale. Narrative control, practiced without any anchor in truth, becomes propaganda, and history is littered with examples of individuals and institutions that mastered the art of story while abandoning any relationship to reality, often with catastrophic consequences for everyone around them. The winners I most respect, if I may use that word cautiously, are the ones who understand the difference between shaping the emphasis of a true story and fabricating a false one entirely. The former is strategy. The latter, sustained long enough, is self-destruction, because reality has a way of eventually reasserting itself against even the most carefully constructed fiction. Learn to control the narrative, but never forget that the narrative must, at some foundational level, remain tethered to what is actually true, or the entire structure will eventually collapse beneath you, often at the worst possible moment. We arrive now at the final, and in many ways, most important lesson. What all of this patience, motive reading, emotional mastery, and narrative control is actually building toward. It is not simply winning a single negotiation or securing a single promotion or outmaneuvering a single rival. The true endgame, the one pursued by every historical figure who maintained power across decades rather than months, is the construction of a position so structurally secure that the person occupying it becomes, in a practical sense, untouchable. Untouchability, as I define it, has almost nothing to do with being liked. In fact, one of the more counterintuitive lessons from history is that the pursuit of universal likability is often incompatible with the pursuit of real, lasting power, because likability requires constant appeasement, and appeasement requires the sacrifice of position whenever it conflicts with popularity. The winners understand instead that they must be respected, feared just enough to be taken seriously. This is the crucial ingredient indispensable. Indispensability is the true foundation of untouchability, because an organization, a family, a social circle will tolerate a great deal of unpleasantness from someone whose absence would create a hole no one else can fill. This is why the most enduring operators spend enormous, often invisible effort making themselves the sole holder of some critical piece of knowledge, relationship, or capability. The executive who knows every major client personally becomes untouchable because firing them threatens the revenue itself. The advisor who has become the only person capable of managing a volatile leader's temperament becomes untouchable because replacing them risks chaos no successor could immediately control. This is not accidental. It is cultivated deliberately, often over years, through the careful hoarding of relationships and information that others assume are freely shared, but that the skilled operator has quietly ensured flow through them and them alone. Alongside indispensability sits a second pillar of untouchability, the cultivation of what I call distributed leverage, a network of accumulated favors, secrets, and obligations spread across enough people that no single rival can move against the operator without triggering resistance from several directions at once. This is why the winners are so relentlessly generous with strategic favors during periods of calm, long before any conflict is on the horizon. Every favor extended is, in a sense, a small deposit into an account that may never need to be withdrawn, but if a moment of real threat arrives, that account can be called upon suddenly and from multiple directions, creating a defensive web that appears to any single attacker simply too costly to challenge. There is a colder, more unsettling dimension to this endgame that I would be dishonest to omit: the willingness, when absolutely necessary, to make an example. Throughout history, the most secure operators have understood that occasional, decisive, visible consequences for those who challenge them serve a purpose far beyond the individual conflict itself. They communicate, silently and effectively to everyone else watching, that the cost of confrontation is simply too high. This is not something exercised casually or often. The winners understand that excessive cruelty breeds resentment and eventual rebellion. But the rare, well-chosen, unmistakable demonstration of